Hey folks, B1B Flyer here. I'd like to have this be my first tutorial. I saw a couple comments earlier today on the forums asking about what folks use for base filler. Well, there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing that. A lot of folks like to use spackle or wood glue. I actually prefer to use, it's called a plumber's epoxy. It's a two-part epoxy. It comes in tubes like this. Loctite makes it. Several other places make it. You can get any hardware store, Walmart, probably even a dollar store, maybe if they've got a hardware section. But it comes in these tubes. It's a little two-part putty. It cures underwater. It's meant for fixing pipes and things like that. But the things I like about it is that it doesn't really dry out. You can use it, and it cures in about 10 minutes. So you can work with it. You can get it where you want it to go. You don't have to be super rushed, but you also don't have to wait several hours for it to cure, and it dries rock hard. It's cheap. It's very easy to work with. You can smooth it out with water. You can texture it. You can add it. I'll just give you some examples of things that I've done in the past. So you can see here in this atlas here, I've basically just filled the base. You can even see my thumbprints are still on there, but I get to the point where when I finish a model, I base it at the end, and I want to get it done. And I'm done with the hard work. I put all the paint into it, and now I just want to get that base done. And the last thing I want to do is wait 4 hours for something to cure or to be completely dry. You can see in this example that texture doesn't really matter with the thumbprints. Let me move into the focus here. If you're going to put sand or ballast or anything, if you're going to put flock over it, you don't really need to be worried about what it's going to be underneath. I just, like I said, want to get it done. So when I do my basing, I tend to use a fast drying epoxy. I use liquid super glue. Costs a little more to use if you're doing a lot of bases, but I don't like to wait for white glue to dry, and sometimes I get a little bit messy with it, and that super glue sets up, it puts it where I want it. Once it's dry, I can add more layers. So here's some other things, interesting things you can do with the plumber's epoxy. You can see here I've made craters, and let me move in the angle here. This is not going to be my normal camera setup. I'm just using a simple tripod mount, so if the camera is shaky, I've got a new mount on order. I'm trying to get it to focus here. Let's see. Let me turn on another light. Try that. Oops. So you can see there, fills in. And you can chip away at it as it's drying, put the holes in it, and make crater effects, pavement, things like that. You can texture it if you want to put some sort of mesh or whatever over the top of it. Just use water. It'll prevent it from sticking. Well, you'll see when I mix it with my hands, I keep my fingers wet. If you decide you want to do something smooth and glue your feet on, I've drilled this one for a different miniature, but I've also tried to mess around with some crackle paint. It didn't turn out as nice as I would have liked. I've done some other stuff with crackle, but that's for something different. But I sculpted those rocks into the base while the putty was wet. You can see a little bit of a line here where it kind of dried separate, but again, that'll be covered by some ground sand or maybe some flock or something like that when I get done with the base. So what you're going to need today to do this is obviously the two-part plumber's epoxy. You're going to need a miniature. I'm going to use this plastic quick draw, which I'll be painting up in a future tutorial coming up soon when we hopefully try to do some live video. You'll want a base. I tend to use metal bases for my plastic miniatures because I like a little bit of weight to them. You'll find also that this putty will add a little bit of weight too, so that's beneficial there. You'll want super glue for the miniature. You'll need a hobby knife. I like to work with a straight razor blade. These are cheap, they're easy to get, they're real sharp. I use that to cut the bases off the miniatures sometimes. Another thing you may want to look at if you don't have, that razor blade will work, but this is I think it's like a dental tool for a dental spatula. It's stainless steel. I mean, I've used this thing for years. It is a go-to for all sorts of stuff. I use it sculpting, I use it for cutting stuff. It's not sharp, but it's got enough of a narrow edge on it that it's really useful. I've got a dish of water here, which is kind of off camera there. And then if you're going to sculpt something, I use these clay sculpting. They're silicone. I use these mostly for green stuff, so I don't really use them for this plaster putty. And actually what I'm going to use on this is going to be the end of the brush. We're going to make a crater in that base. I'll show you how I do that. Now I haven't really trimmed up this base. Ordinarily I would file it down, and obviously I'll show you how I cut this off real quick to get that done. But just be aware that this isn't super super defined and nice and my normal standard here. So I'm just going to start cutting this base. I've got some plastic nips. You can use wire cutters if that's what you got lying around, but I'm just going around the edge of the miniature here just to get the feet clear. Another thing I do too is if you're doing buildings and stuff, you can take that razor blade, and I'll actually probably try to do that. And you can, if you got a sharp enough razor blade, this one might not be, you can shave these numbers off. And I'm going to put them on some terrain and factory buildings and things like that. And then I just think it's cool to have a textured number sticking out, kind of like a sign or something that doesn't just look like a painted on. Plus, I don't have decals that big, so saves you some money there if you don't want to order some decals. Try not to cut that number. So I'm just working this off. I want to leave some room, obviously, to work. You could take the entire feet off, too, if you want to. A good way to do that is to put this in some hot water. Go boil some water in the microwave. Just dip it in there, or use some tweezers to hold the miniature or the part of the miniature you want. If they're deformed or bent or whatever, you can shape them. And then that'll soften up that plastic, and then you can carefully take that razor blade and just cut right down from the feet. You know, make sure you're cutting away from yourself and all that good stuff, knife safety, things like that. I tried to take my thumb off a couple months ago. It was actually in the kitchen, but just be aware that accidents do happen, and they happen to the best of us, and it wouldn't be a hobby if you couldn't get hurt. All right, so you can see I ended up cutting through the numbers. I'll just get done with that, but I'll just show you what I do real quick if you want to see that. Just kind of start working it slightly, kind of rocking back and forth gently. You can see you can lift that number right off. So something else I wasn't planning on showing you, but there you go. There's a 1, or most of a 1. I've got several of them I've already shaved off, but just something else you can do if you want to get some textured numbers. I'll take this last one off here just to get it out of the way. Don't care about it. If you want it perfectly flat, my wife has a ton of these emery boards, the rough ones. Sand it down. I use these things all the time. Get a little bit of roughness to it. So now you can see plenty of room in the base now to put what we want to put down to add something interesting. And like I said, I cut the feet off in between and just do 2 pads or whatever, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and do this right now. So we'll get him glued down, and then we'll get the putty mixed. While we're letting that cure, I will talk a little bit about glue. This is my go-to glue. Loctite Gel Control with the blue. I have some other ones. They make them in with black. This is definitely a thicker consistency. The black one is, if you want to fill gaps a little bit more, I don't recommend doing that all the time, but if you want something that's going to get just a slight little bit more gap fill, this will be what I would use. I think this black one sets up a little faster than the blue. But I've never had an issue with the tips. Sometimes get a little bit crusty or whatever. You can usually either pick it off or take it with a hobby knife or whatever. And sometimes the lids get a little bit of gunk in there. But I don't have a problem with this type of glue drying out. It's about $3 or $4 depending on where you buy it per tube. But it saves a lot of hassle with having glue dry out. I can let it sit for months at a time and never have an issue. I think they make a red one too. They have different consistencies. This is ultra liquid control, and I actually haven't opened this one yet. You can see I haven't twisted it down, but I don't have an idea of what that's going to be like, but I'll mess around with that when I start needing more glue. Alright, so he's all set up. He's on there. Let's get to mixing the putty. So, if it's been a long time, I think sometimes they come with the little covers on the stuff here. This can get a little crusty. I'm going to go ahead and take that stuff off, but honestly it's going to add a little bit of texture, and depending on what you're doing with it, you might want that grit, but I'm just going to take that off for now since I don't want it to mess up this tutorial. I'm just going to slice, and I'm dipping my razor blade in water off camera in case you hadn't seen, just to keep it from sticking. So might need just a little bit more. I'm just guesstimating. Try not to use too much, but it's better than not having enough putty. All right. And once you start, if you have a line of 3 or 4 of these, that you want to get done, then obviously you can cut off more. But don't cut off too much, because if you run past your working time, Once it gets kind of rubbery, you're not going to be able to fit it in anything anymore. So I'm just going to dip it in the water, keep my fingers wet. I'm just going to knead this stuff together, get it going. It's not as consistent and smooth as green stuff would be. It's going to be a little bit gritty. So I wouldn't recommend trying to use this stuff to maybe sculpt anything, but if you want stuff to look like kind of rubble or concrete, or maybe you need to patch a building wall or something like that, or you're adding something for some terrain, again, this would probably be the first thing I would go to, simply because it's going to dry quickly. I've used it to actually cast inside of hex bases and make hex shape flat pieces to try and make some buildings and stuff. It didn't work out as well as I thought it would, but I mean, there's all sorts of stuff you can try, and it is very tacky. So knead it for about a minute or so, just get it nice and mixed together, and you can see there's some of that texture in there that I was talking about, some of the dried pieces and things like that. It's not going to be super smooth. I guess you could probably work it, but the more you mess with it, it will, you're working against your cure time. So just keep that in mind. Keeping my fingertips wet so it doesn't stick. If you let your fingers get dry, this stuff will let you know really quickly. If you don't want to touch it, you could probably wear some latex or some other type of protective thin glove. Can't think of the name of the other stuff, but anyway, once you're ready to go, just start sticking it in the base, and I just use my fingertip and I kind of sweep back towards the edge just to get it out to that edge point, and then just kind of press it in. It's real simple. Know I'm going to leave a crater, so I know I'm going to have to work with the front side a little bit more because it's going to push some other material out. As you get to these feet here, I just take my finger and I just mash it in, and that's where you can go back and get to that sculpting tool or that that dental tool that I showed you. Quick, again, keep your tools wet. You can just kind of push it down. And while it's drying and curing, once it's gotten mostly cured, you can go back and you can pick stuff off fairly easily. So if you get it on the foot of the miniature, or maybe over the edge where you don't want it, real easy to trim and keep in control so it's not getting everywhere. Alright, and if you want to let your bases go over the edges, you can. I'm not going to do that on this one, just for the sake of time. Alright, so now I've got our base there, and it's full of my fingerprints. I could go in between the feet if I really wanted to. But I'm just going to take my finger, dab it, and I'm just going to start to smooth it out. Get things kind of not looking like I just mashed everything in with my fingers. Again, you could use a sculpting tool like I've showed you, but just for the sake of quickness. Alright, so now I had plenty left over. If I had an empty hex space I wanted to mash in, I could do that. If I wanted to start sculpting some rocks, I could start doing that. I have this mat here. This stuff won't dry, but I mean, I can just put together a few rocks while I'm sitting here that maybe I'll add some vertical relief onto a hex base maybe later on down the road. So I'm just going to do that real quick. You can see how quick, just making little tiny small hills, or whatever you feel like doing. You can use tools. They'll have fingerprints on them, but if I cover them up with flock or whatever, maybe it'll be interesting, something to do later. Alright, so I'm going to grab that brush handle really, dip it in some water, and I'm going to put a crater right here. Alright, just kind of dipping it right there, and maybe we'll do a little smaller one right over here too. I'm going to move this, I'm just going to kind of work it a little bit out. I'm going to leave this one kind of shallow. Alright, so now, let's see if I can get a better angle. Kind of got a crater with a lip, and you can kind of start working the hobby knife. You can do cracks, you can do damage. I'm not going for anything particular, but if it looks rough, that's what you would think damaged pavement or cracked earth looks like. And you can also wait until this kind of starts to cure a little bit more before you start kind of adding some of this texture. But I'm trying to get this all done. It's difficult for me to show it on camera. Like I said, I'll have a better camera setup here. Hopefully in a couple days. I ordered a more overhead mount, which should give me a little bit better ability to see what I'm doing, make sure it's staying in the camera field, but also to give you guys a little bit better look with some more light. I'm going to add some more over here. And it ends up kind of looking like a little bit of a crosshatch. The nice thing is, though, is you can go back in and use a sculpting tool, or you could use that brush handle and you can kind of round it out again or kind of mash it together like you would with any other sculpting material. So I'm going to do that right now. Again, keep it wet. Just did a little dab in there to kind of make it look like I just basically did what I did. Just kind of rough it up. And as it starts to cure, you can actually carve out pieces if you want to make it look, you know, not as uniform and more like a actual bit of dirt or pavement. It's starting to get a little bit harder now. Focus on trying to get this come out a little bit. This stuff is primable. You can seal it if you wanted to put ground or flock on it. I mean, once it's cured where it's not tacky, and it shouldn't be too malleable. I mean, you can stick your fingernail in it, and you can see it's starting to already bounce back a little bit. You know you're getting pretty close to being good to go. Just make sure you mix it thoroughly, and make sure you keep the parts even. If you go too much of the resin, not the hardener, obviously the hardener will get it nice and hard, but it'll never get hard, and then you'll be frustrated. So now I'm starting to able to pick out a little bit of the pieces here. I'm trying to make it look a little bit more interesting. It's starting to get a little bit more, I'd say, rubbery, but it's probably the best way to describe it. But I'm just picking out pieces here to make it look a little more visually diverse. And I'm going to wait for that ridge, that lip there to dry completely, because I don't want to start mashing it in and have it kind of destroy the lip, but it looks kind of like a shell came this way, so I'm happy with that. I'll start working this a little more here. Again, be careful. Hobby knives. Every hobbyist, every miniature hobbyer has got one of those stories. I'm pretty sure I don't have much skin left on my thumb. I tend to scrape into my thumb when I'm cleaning up miniatures, but anyway, enough about me. I have one more right there. There we go. Okay, so that's where we're at. The craters. Let me get it to focus here. Let's see. I'm trying to look at the view here. Yeah, it's dry enough. So now I'm just going to chip away a little bit of this here just to kind of get rid of some of that rounded uniformity. There we go. Maybe a little more. There. And then we'll come out this way for kind of a deeper crack. Why not come this way too? There we go. All right, so there is how I fill bases, and there's a way to add some interesting terrain feature to it that isn't just some sand and rocks on the top. Obviously, when I come to fill this in, I'll put some sand around it, maybe some debris. I'll probably put a little bit in here just to kind of even it out, but more than likely I'll be able to just do that with some sand and some super glue. So nothing that's not easily overcome, but this stuff is basically, let me get these rocks over here. I mean, it's, you can hear it already, it's hard. So I'd give them maybe another 10 or 15 minutes, make sure they're dry, make sure they cure completely before I trust that I can paint it. But that's it. That's as easy as I like to do bases.